is a 78 RPM record. This particular record is 104 years old. Now, what can a 104-year-old recording tell us about the future? Well, to answer that question, you need to understand a few things about the technology behind this 104-year-old record. First of all, when those records were made, no electricity was used. Everything was what they called acoustic. It was the power of the voice of the singer or the instrument of the player that provided the energy that cut the groove in the record. There was no electricity involved either in the recording end or the playback end. While this might sound very attractive in today's green world, there were distinct limitations. There was no microphone. There was a large funnel with a diaphragm across the end of it and a needle that vibrated when you sang, spoke, or played an instrument into this funnel. At the very end of it, the needle vibrated and cut the groove into the record, and that's how the sound was transferred onto the recording. This was a limited technology. In other words, you couldn't just play whatever you wanted, say whatever you wanted, or sing whatever you wanted. You had to adapt how you played, talked, or sang into a format that fit the technology. People talked in very clipped tones. They spoke at an even volume. They did not let their words fade. They kept everything very succinct and at the same sound volume. Singers sang upper and mid-range. They didn't sing very low or very high, and they did not sing faint passages very often because the equipment couldn't pick it up, and you had to be very close to the funnel and change the way you sang to fit the recording's equipment's limitations. Instruments, think about it. Since you had to gather around the funnel, there was a limit to the number of instruments that the recording could pick up. A full symphony orchestra just wouldn't work because the people in the back couldn't get close enough to the funnel to pick it up, so they used smaller ensembles gathered closely together, playing as loud as they could, even on the quiet passages, to make the recording work. If you didn't know any of this and you were to listen to a recording made 104 years ago, you could very easily say, wow, this is the way everyone talked, sang, or played instruments back in those days. So we now know how they talked, how they sang, and how they played music. You would be wrong. Everything you hear on these old recordings is a modified version of the way they really did those things because the equipment couldn't pick it up unless they did that. Now, how does that apply to the future as we know it? People still modify their behavior to fit the limitations of the technology they use to record themselves, and therefore, in the future, when we are listened to, watched, or observed via the technology of today, whatever limitations we pass on with the technology very likely will be misinterpreted by our friends in the future as representing the way we were. If you are fortunate enough to have anyone of your acquaintance who really knows, let's say, music, for instance, you can very easily see by referring to the original scores of music from 104 years ago that they played nothing like the brittle, clipped, simplistic tones we hear in our 104-year-old recordings. But in fact, the music was played with great dynamics and passion, maybe even more than we have today, because while the recordings were somewhat a record of the performances 104 years ago, the actual best quality performances 104 years ago never got recorded or captured on anything. They were for the moment, and when you heard it, it was gone. Once you heard it, it was gone. Think about this. Isn't that still to a degree true? and no matter how good our technology is today, there are going to be limitations to it in the way people speak, sing, and play, or record anything that revolves around human activity. So in the future, if that is the only record that people have to look back on us and judge us, they will look back on us incorrectly. So maybe we owe it to ourselves and our society to start relying more on word of mouth, actual passing of information from one generation to the next, so that it is a backup to the flawed technology that, at least as far as we know, is far from perfect in replicating human behavior and passing it on to the future. So maybe there's no way getting around the fact that we need to talk to each other, know each other, and share information with each other every single chance we get. And that is today's new thought on an old idea.